this one. Okay. I guess this microphone's not working now, right?
That one. This one. This one.
Yeah, I can't. It won't.
All right. Now we just require to reconvene the Honorable Judge Christopher Bruns presiding.
Please be seated. Members of the jury, give me just a moment here. I'm having a computer difficulty. It's something I need to fix before we start hearing evidence. Thank you. Welcome back, members of the jury. Mr. Parrish, would you like to recall your witness now?
I will, Your Honor. Ms. McComas, would you come back, please? And you are still under oath. Please.
You are still under oath, ma'am. Please take your seat. Go ahead, Mr. Parrish.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. McComas, we're almost finished with your testimony, but we want to pick up where we left off yesterday. You indicated that you were not surprised at the time that you had heard, and you said about 7-something, that Alex was involved in the shooting. Explain briefly why you indicate you were not surprised.
I was not surprised that he shot someone. I was surprised that it wasn't defending someone.
Okay. And what was it about Alex that you led the opinion as his mom that he would have been defending someone?
That's Alex. That's what he does.
Well, I don't know what you mean by that's what he does.
He protects the underdog. He helps the person in need.
And that's been your experience with him, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Did you try to call him after this incident?
Yes, sir.
Were you able, did he take your call?
No.
I want to talk to you now a couple of times about the last time you had seen him prior to the shooting. I believe you mentioned yesterday it was in Texas.
Yes.
And was there any experience that you saw that concerned you as a mother at that point about his conduct and the anger that you had seen in him?
Yes.
What was it?
Well, had pastor over to give us a house blessing on the new house, and we were waiting for him. He was on the phone. I believe he was on the phone with Kelly.
Him? Who is him?
Alex.
Okay. And who was on the phone?
Kelly.
Okay.
They was texting, and kept waiting for him, and he just was angry because he was trying to do both at the same time, participate in the house blessing and text Kelly. And I asked him if he was ready, and he was just mad about it. He was just angry that I was interrupting him dealing with Kelly.
How long did you see that anger last in him while the minister was blessing the home?
Long after the pastor had gone.
And how long was that, if you can recall?
45 minutes.
Did he eventually calm down?
Yes.
I want to talk about a couple of other items. First of all, how long has Alex had access to weapons and guns?
His entire life.
And when you mean his entire life, since he was what age and who taught him how to use weapons?
My father taught him pretty much since he could walk and talk.
And And he's always had guns around him.
Yes.
Were you aware of whether or not he had a permit to carry, as has been testified in this courtroom?
Yes.
And how long has he had his permit to carry?
We both got him in Osage, so 2013, maybe, I think.
You heard, let's strike that question. When you come to assessing Alex in terms of his manners, his respect for people, etc., as a mother, did you instill those values in him?
Yes.
Did you have an opportunity to see and experience what other activities Alex would participate in finishing up high school and after he finished high school, in terms of, did he do athletics, did he do Boy Scouts, anything like that? What activities did he participate in?
He participated in Choir of the Fine Arts in high school.
Did he also take an interest in writing?
Yes.
And up until the time you saw him in Texas for the last time, did he participate in that?
Writing? Oh, yes.
He's always done that.
Yes, sir.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Ms. Linus?
Yes, thank you. Ms. McComas, when you were talking about when he got so angry with the minister blessing the house, when was that?
Let's see. We arrived in July, August, second week of August.
Of 2014?
Yes, ma'am.
And at that time, he was angry in about 45 minutes. It took him, you said, to calm down.
Yes.
At any time during that 45 minutes or while the minister was there, was he violent in any way?
No.
Did he destroy property or
No.
anything like that?
No.
Hurt any animals?
No.
Anything like that? And you described in your testimony yesterday there were 2 episodes you recall when he was a teenager when he became very angry, is that right?
Yes.
And one was when he was accused of having the pocket knife at school?
Yeah.
And also when someone made a comment to your youngest daughter that he thought was very inappropriate?
Yes.
Okay. And was it inappropriate? Did you hear the comment?
Yes, ma'am.
So he was justified in being
Yes,
upset? And neither of those times, though, did he become violent, is that right?
No.
And even when he had the knife, the pocket knife at school, that was just because he was showing it to friends, is that right?
He was accused of that, but I don't know if he was actually showing it to anybody.
But he wasn't accused of brandishing it or threatening anybody with a knife?
No.
It didn't have anything to do with any kind of, there was no episode of violence or things like that?
No.
And he never had a mental health diagnosis that you know of, is that
No.
right? And he never had any kind of mental health treatment, and he's never had any kind of mental health treatment that you know of, is that right?
None.
And even when he got angry, as you testified, you never took him, or you never thought it was to the extent that he needed any kind of mental health treatment, is that right?
No.
And your understanding during 2015, the first 6 months of 2015, was that your son's frustration was with work, is that right?
Yes.
And it was the people he worked with he didn't think were particularly bright or effective?
Yes.
And you met or provided information to Dr. Logan to do a psychiatric evaluation of your son, is that right?
He asked a few questions.
Okay. And did you also provide a written kind of autobiography or something of your son to him?
Yes.
Okay. So you provided in-person information to him as well as providing written information to him?
Yes.
And those were to try to help him determine if there was any kind of mental health issue with your son, is that right?
Yes.
And you tried to include everything that you thought was important that would show if there was any kind of mental problems with your son, is that right?
Yes.
So any kind of violent tendencies or things like that, would you have included in there?
Yes.
Growing up, until he shot Andrea Farrington, you never knew him to be violent, is that right?
Never.
So there was never a time when he was fighting with people and would become outraged and engage in fighting?
He would be outraged, but he wouldn't engage in fighting.
Or any other kind of violent act towards animals or destroying property?
No.
And so up until June of 2015, you weren't aware of him ever being violent until the day he shot Andrea?
He never wanted to be noticed, so no, ma'am.
And even in high school, you never knew him to be in a fight with other boys?
No.
And he had good grades up until the 10th grade, is that right?
Yeah, his grades were good. But again, if it was something that was not interesting to him, he didn't really put forth much effort.
Okay. And then in 11th and 12th grade, it was only the classes that interested him that he put an effort into?
Yes, ma'am.
Otherwise, he was kind of bored with school?
Yes, ma'am.
But he could do well if he wanted to, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And he was involved in some things, you said the fine arts, theater, things like that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And he had friends in high school?
Yes, ma'am.
And he didn't get into trouble during school other than the one time you've already told us about taking the pocket knife?
No, ma'am, never in trouble.
Okay. No other discipline at all in school?
No.
And that would be all through school, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
So just the one time of taking the pocket knife?
Yes, ma'am.
He was never in any criminal trouble outside of school, is that right?
Never.
Okay. I think we heard about one speeding ticket, but that's, as far as you know, the extent of any kind of criminal history, is that right?
Yeah, I didn't even know about the speeding ticket.
And he never had trouble with drugs or alcohol in high school?
No.
Or after high school?
No.
And even though he had weapons and was used to being weapons, you never knew him to use guns or threaten people with guns or things like that, is that right?
No.
And he had no, there was never any problem, or you never had any concerns about his use of the weapons, the guns or other weapons?
No, he was well educated.
And he would certainly know how to use a gun, is that right?
Yes.
And how lethal it was if he used a gun?
Yes.
And he knew the proper safety precautions to take to make sure no one was hurt with a gun?
Yes.
Going back to the only time that he was disciplined, and you said over the night that he was angry about the 2-day in-school suspension because he thought it was unfair. And you tend to agree with that, is that right?
Yes.
You thought it was really over too much discipline over something that was pretty minor.
Yes, ma'am.
So he had reason to be angry at that time.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Anything further, Mr. Parrish?
I have a couple of questions, Your Honor. Would you describe for the jury the anger you saw in your son, including his reaction, etc., when the principal had him in the office or the administrator had him in the office, describing to him that he was going to get an in-school suspension?
Quick, elevated anger and frustration. Just pissed. Angry. Very angry at the accusation of, you know.
How was his facial reaction?
It was a blank look on his face, but his ears were red. He had a clenching of the jaw. His fists were tightened to his side.
Did you think at that point there was any necessity to get him some help based
No.
on your reaction to him, to
No.
that incident?
No.
Did it strike you as something that was unusual at that point with regard to Al?
Yeah, how angry he was over it, yes.
The other question I have for you, she asked you about weapons, and weapons in general. He had more than the knife that he carried. How often did he carry this knife with him?
Every day.
For how long since you've known him?
10, since he was 10, I believe.
He's always carried a knife with him.
Oh, yes.
And what about the other weapons that was shown that he had in his vehicle? Where are those weapons from?
My dad,
And what type are they? Describe them briefly.
oh, they're collector items, really.
And I know you mentioned that yesterday, but what type of collector items were they?
Heritage, their family.
Name the weapons.
Oh my
Name
gosh,
the-
tomahawks,
Okay.
knives. I don't
And
remember.
were they given to him?
Oh,
Were they
yes,
given to Alex?
yes,
How
yes.
long ago has he had them? Since he was at what age?
Probably right around 10.
The last question I have for you is that Ms. Langus asked you whether or not you knew about the other incidents of anger or temper that he displayed. You knew about them, didn't you, from his your other siblings and stuff, did you not?
Yes,
Okay. Are you saying you just didn't see them yourself?
yes,
Okay. But the siblings, Janae and other people who made these observations told you about them?
yes,
Okay. So you were aware of them?
yes.
Okay. I'll just show her that. You know what exhibit number this is, son?
Yes. 21.
Okay, it's not great. I'm just going to show it. All right, it's been on here. Okay. Thinks this is wrong. All right. I'm going to show you, Ms. McComas, State's Exhibit 21, page 13, the weapons that you were talking about, those items that were collectibles. Okay, thank you. And it's okay, the jury's seen it anyway. Those are items that you were referring to.
Yes,
All right. And I think it's already been introduced as evidence in the case. And all of these are collector items from, what is your father?
my father.
Okay, so it's been Alex's granddad, right?
Yep.
Okay. Is there anything new here that you've never seen before since Alex been growing up?
The badge?
I'm talking about in terms of weapons.
Oh, no, sir.
All right, thank you. I have nothing further.
Ms. Linus, anything further?
Yes, just briefly. Those weapons that you were just referring to in State's Exhibit 21, page 13, I believe, were those things that were important to Alex?
Yes.
Did he keep them at a special place at home?
No, we usually, anywhere we went, we had weapons. We carried weapons as a family.
Okay. These were pretty important to him, though, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And the time that you were talking about, and maybe you said this yesterday and I don't remember, but when this incident happened, when he was suspended because of the pocket knife that he had, how old was he? What year was he in school?
I'm thinking it was his junior year.
So like in 11th grade?
Yes, ma'am.
When he would have been 16, 17?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Anything further, Mr. Parrish?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Ma'am, you may step down. You're excused. Mr. Parrish, you may call your next witness.
Yes, Doctor, not Doctor, but Detective Barkoff, he's right out in there. Okay, thank you. She would get his report out before she left.
Detective, could you raise your right hand for me? Do you solemnly swear or affirm that any testimony you give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please take your seat. Please state and spell your name.
It's Jeffrey, Jeffrey, Allen, Allen, Barkoff, Barkhoff.
Your witness, Mr. Parrish.
Thank you, Honor. Detective Barkoff, we had a chance to meet this morning when we arrived at the courthouse, is that correct?
We did.
Okay, I certainly appreciate you driving up from Coralville to testify here today. Your testimony will be fairly brief. I did explain to you what I wanted you to testify about, is that correct?
You did.
And did you have a chance to go back, take a look at your reports, please?
I did.
All right. With that, I'm going to lay a couple of qualification questions. Would you tell the jury just briefly where you're employed and what your work is, please?
I'm currently employed as a police detective in the city of Coralville.
How long have you been employed there?
Since January 23rd, 1985.
Briefly tell us your qualifications to serve as a police officer, and what I mean by that, where you finished school and your training in that area. And you can narrow it down as narrow as possible. Thank you.
I started my career as a part-time police officer while going to college in Janesville, Iowa. I have an applied arts degree in criminal justice. Once being hired by the Coralville Police Department, I attended the Iowa Law Enforcement Academy. Recant that. I attended the Iowa Law Enforcement Academy while I was a police officer for the city of Janesville. Then I was hired for the city of Coralville. After being hired there, I have been through numerous in-service training hours. I was promoted to a sergeant, and then eventually I went into the investigation bureaus. Lately, most of my duties entail investigating sexual assaults.
And have you had a wider range, too, of investigations, Detective?
We're a small department, so yes, I'll take the majority of the sexual assaults, but if another case come in, be it a burglary, be it home invasion, something along that lines of forgery, I will also investigate those as well.
Okay. And you've been doing sexual assault cases for approximately how long?
I believe 12 years now.
Okay. Are you married, sir?
I am.
And do you have kids?
I do.
And how old are they?
I have two that are in their 20s, and then I have two stepchildren that are, one's 9 and one's 11.
Do you also work part-time at another position?
I do.
And tell the jury where that is, please.
I work for Shields in Coralville.
And I just want to ask you, Detective, in your experience, which you've laid out as quite extensive, I take it that you've had training in taking statements from witnesses, is that correct?
Yes.
And particularly, you said for 12 years you've been in the sexual assault unit. I take it that you would have a degree of sensitivity when people are upset how to take their statements.
Absolutely.
All right. And you are trained to be detailed and put down what you think are important and significant factors when you're putting statements together.
I try to.
All right. And the statement I told you to go back and review is one from a witness who testified by the name of Carla Frederick. And did you have a chance to pull that report up and take a look at it?
I did.
All right. And taking a look at it, Detective, do you recall where that statement was taken and the date it was taken?
Yes, it was taken the night of the shooting, and it was in a booth in the Magic Mushroom, I believe is the name of the restaurant.
All right. And you would agree in that statement, while taking that statement, Ms. Frederick was upset.
Of course.
And it wasn't a horrible, horrible incident, is that correct?
That is correct.
But you did feel, as you have had in other cases, to take statements from people in that state, is that correct?
Yes.
Sir, did she, in that statement, tell you that she thought Ms. Farrington was leading Kozak on and was known to be a flirt?
She did make reference to that. It's something to that regards, yes.
And you put that into your statement, is that correct?
Yes.
Did she ever come back and tell you later that that statement was incorrect or it was a false statement that you had prepared?
She didn't come back to me, no.
You wouldn't have prepared a false statement with regard to that under any circumstances, would you have?
No, sir.
But did you take into consideration that she was quite emotional when she made it?
Absolutely.
Nothing further?
Ms. Lance?
Did you also obtain other statements from Ms. Fredericks in addition to that particular one you were asked
I
about?
did.
And she gave you details about what she had seen at the mall that night?
She did.
What was her emotional state when you met with her?
She had been more upset earlier when she was waiting to be questioned. When I talked to her, she was obviously welling up. She was shaking. She had been through, you could tell she'd been through a great ordeal. But she was able to articulate with me. There was a couple times when she broke down. We paused for a few minutes and then we continued on. But yeah, she was I'd say almost distraught.
And she was able to tell you about the text messages she had observed between the defendant and Ms. Farrington?
She did. That's how it led into the other statements that she made subsequently.
Including that she thought that Ms. Farrington thought that the defendant was very angry at her,
Yes.
and where he responded with some profanity in responding to her.
Yes, Ms. Farrington had texted him, asked if he was mad, and he responded with that.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Anything further, Mr. Parrish?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Thank you, Detective. You're excused, you may step down.
Your Honor, we don't believe we need this witness anymore.
All right.
Go back to Iowa City. Coralville, not Iowa City. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Parrish, you may call your next witness.
Thank you. Would you come forward, please, in front of the court? Thank you.
Please raise your right hand for me. You solemnly swear or affirm that any testimony you give in this trial will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Please take your seat. Please state and spell your name for the record.
Andrew High, Andrewhigh.
Your witness, Mr. Parrish.
Thank you, Your Honor. What is your occupation, sir?
I'm an assistant professor of communication studies at the University of Iowa.
And what is your employment address?
105 Becker Communication Studies Building in Iowa City.
Would you tell the jury, and we have a copy of your curriculum vitae, I will introduce that at a point, but I want to go over the high points of your experience and your education. Would you tell us, please, prior to your employment, I believe you stayed at the University of Iowa, is that correct?
Yep.
Where were you employed prior to that?
Penn State University.
Do you have any academic degrees? And if so, would you tell briefly, since high school, what those degrees are, please?
Sure. I have both a bachelor's degree and master's degree. Bachelor's was in mass communication, master's degree was in interpersonal communication, both from the University of Delaware, and I have a PhD in interpersonal communication from Penn State.
And would you tell us, please, what you do at the University of Iowa in the Department of Communication Studies?
Sure. I teach classes and I do research. My research concentrates on computer-mediated communication, or how the internet can shape different processes of communication compared to other channels of the internet or face-to-face, so how newer communication technologies influence communication, and I study supportive communication, or comforting.
Doctor, can I ask you to slow down just a little bit?
Sure.
And would you tell us how long you have been in this field, doctor, since receiving your PhD?
Sure. I've been in the field I've been at the University of Iowa for 4 years. I worked and taught at Penn State for a year or two prior to that, and was there for 5 years before that to finish my PhD, working on my PhD.
Would you tell us, please, why completing your PhD and the positions that you hold now, what positions have you held other than the one you have at the University of Iowa?
I was a graduate teaching assistant at Penn State, and that's pretty much it.
And tell us what you do right now in terms of teaching. Give the jury some idea of the type of classes you have and what you teach, and we'll talk a little bit about your research.
Sure. I teach Similar classes at different levels. I teach, I'm currently teaching a research methods class, the process of doing research in the communication discipline. I teach both graduate level and undergraduate level courses on supportive communication and computer mediated communication, courses that correspond with my areas of research interest.
Doctor, is this your field of study? Is it an emerging field in the study of communications, or it's something that's been around for a while?
The two different strains of my research represent two different, comforting has been studied for a long time. That's a pretty established trend in communication. The study of computer-mediated communication is emerging. It's really in the past 20 years or so we've seen any research of substance on that, and there was a little research before that, but it's more of an emerging trend.
Have you done any lecturing in your field outside of the university?
I've been invited to give talks at various other universities. I was at the University of Southern Alabama recently. I did a lecture at Rutgers, the College of New Jersey.
Have you also done publications in your field, whether they're to deliver as lectures or to deliver for publication or future publication?
Yes, I have published in the field.
Would you give us some idea of the areas that you have published in and what you anticipate publishing in?
Sure. I have a paper that's was just accepted on online dating, so how you craft an online dating profile, whether that is perceived to be positive or successful by users of online dating sites. I've published about how comforting messages are perceived differently when they're enacted face-to-face or via channels of text-based chat, sort of in the instant messenger sort of channel. I've published about the supportive messages that people desire and what they receive when they're coping with various, infertility was one context I look at. I've looked at how people can vary a Facebook page, a social media page, when they're experiencing a problem, and look at ways that they can convey that information that most accurately presents sort of what they're feeling and that influences people's willingness to provide support for that problem. Those are the general areas of some examples.
And how do you collect your data for your research? Would you please explain to the jury in this online dating article that you prepared, explain to them how you collect your data, how you set up your test group, control groups to work on that?
Sure. I'm a quantitative social scientist, so I use numbers and generally data sets that have anywhere, usually in the hundreds, 1, 2, 3, 4. I think my largest data set has about 500 people in it. And I do experiments and surveys. So for the online dating one, for example, I manipulated dating profiles. We created, in that study, it was 8 different dating profiles that varied in certain dimensions. I randomly assigned people to view one of those 8 dating profiles, and then they answer a battery of questions describing the profiles for me. Most of my research is done quite similarly. I either have people answer questions on a survey, or I assign them to an experimental condition and then get their responses and perceptions of that experiment.
Is electronic communications becoming a greater mode of communication than we've ever known before? I assume it's almost a self-answering question, but and would you describe what you have learned in that area from your research and what you can share with us that is from your expertise valuable?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people are, like you said, it's sort of self-answering. People are using the internet to communicate, way more than they ever have before. For some, especially teenagers, they're now saying that they communicate via text message more than any other channel. It's becoming some people's preferred mode of communicating. So it's certainly extremely, extremely common. Upwards of 90% of, again, teenagers, younger folks, have a profile on a social networking site. Yeah, it's extremely common, more common in all age groups, but the highest user age group is usually teenagers, 20-year-olds.
And Doctor, in doing your research in this area and formulating your opinions with regard to this matter, have you done studies that included exchanges of text messages?
I've asked people about their texting behaviors. I usually don't have people actual text during an interaction. One of the doctoral students I work with recently completed a dissertation that involved people texting messages back and forth. I, for a variety of logistical reasons, don't often use texting as often in my actual experiments.
And would you tell us, Doctor, whether or not, based upon your research you've done and the work you've done in this area, whether or not people communicate differently electronically as opposed to face-to-face communications?
They can communicate differently. I wouldn't want to say that everyone communicates differently, and I can give you, for instance, one study that I published looks at how especially people of different genders communicate supportive messages. So for example, men often find it difficult to be sensitive with another man. They don't provide very sensitive, supportive messages, but if you put that couple and ask them to type their messages back and forth, we see more sensitive messages. We see the reverse pattern for women. Women generally don't like insensitive messages from another woman, and especially so when they happen online. So just an example of, yes, and not only that, but you know, what information we're posting online could influence how people are responding to us. So yeah, there are differences in how people communicate online versus face-to-face.
Doctor, I'm going to show you what is marked as Defendant's Exhibit DD. Let me show you what is marked as a Defendant's Exhibit DD and tell us whether or not that is your curriculum visa.
It is.
And is it accurate and updated with regard to the work, the publications that you've done in this area of communications? And one last thing I want to ask you, are you a member of any professional organization?
It is updated. There's a paper or two that are missing from the publication, but that could very well be because I don't have the most recent version of it online, and there's some recent updates that I haven't got to include yet. But it is up to date, and I am a member of, I'm currently a member of the National Communication Association. I have been a member of the International Communication Association, as well as the International Association for Relationship Research.
I move to admit.
Any objections?
No objection.
Exhibit DD is admitted.
Doctor, would you tell us, before you give us your thoughts on some aspects of this case, were you sent some material to review?
I was.
Right. Did I also come down at some point to the University of Iowa and meet with you in your office?
Yes.
Okay. Did I send you some correspondence off and on?
Yes.
Now, would you tell us what you reviewed in addition to your studies and your qualifications in this area with your PhD and your writings and reading material? What else did you review to prepare yourself for your testimony here?
In addition to our meeting, I reviewed a sample of text messages that I was sent and 3 to 4 reports based on psychologists.
Okay. And did you have full opportunity to take a look at them and, along with your background and experience, to think through this process of what this information said to you? Is that correct?
Yes.
Doctor, based upon your background, your experience, your writing, and also the information that's been provided to you, as an expert in communications, are you able to formulate an opinion, and this calls for a yes and no answer, as to whether or not certain people communicate easier electronically as opposed to in person?
Yes.
What is that opinion?
I think that for certain people, the internet is an attractive channel of communication. It's easier to present or express yourself online than it is face-to-face. We talk a lot about face threat in communication. It can be less face-threatening to present yourself online.
have you, in your background and research and review of all the documents provided to you, able to formulate an opinion as to whether or not online communication could in fact create some ambiguity?
It can. I don't want to say in all cases it does, but it can. When we interact online, we use what we call the nonverbal channel of communication. So we still have the words that we might be texting back and forth, but you lose everything in addition to the words. Your gestures, your eye contact, your tone of voice, your volume, the rate at which you speak. What those nonverbal cues normally do is convey the emotional or relational aspects of a message. So not what was said, but how was it said. And we communicate, especially in a leaner channel like text messaging, we lose a lot of those cues that we would have face-to-face, and in some cases that can create ambiguity.
Were you able to formulate an opinion on, well, let's try that. Initially, Doctor, you were made aware that there were some anticipation of getting a huge volume of text messages from an iPhone 5S, is that correct?
Yes.
And did you get information later that that information was not going to be provided because of the inability to get the phone open?
Exactly, yes.
Now, you did get a series, and we don't have to go through it for the jury because it's already been admitted, a series of text messages that were exchanged, is that correct?
Yes.
And based upon that, did you make any assessment based upon your background and experience and your writings and your review of these text messages along with the other report, some nature of the relationship that existed in the text messages?
Yeah, again, I can only base this off the messages that I saw. It seemed as though there was a relationship with some commitment, some intimacy. There's some, planning and stability there. At the same time, it seemed like there were periods of communication followed by long silences, and yeah, on and off again sort of relationship.
And can people, based upon your research, your background, experience in this area, form the same type of intimacy in a relationship that people would form face-to-face?
It's hard to say about this relationship in particular, but yes, with people who communicate primarily online can certainly experience as intimate and committed of a relationship as they can face-to-face.
No further questions.
Ms. Linus or Ms. Elliott?
Thank you, Your Honor. Morning, Dr. High.
Morning.
Just to clear up for the jury, you're not a psychologist, right?
I am not.
And you're not a psychiatrist.
I am not.
So you don't have any information to share with them on the defendant's mental state, correct?
I do not.
And you cannot speak to his ability to plan, correct?
I cannot.
Or his ability to deliberate
No.
or premeditate?
No.
Maybe approach us.
You may. Ladies and gentlemen, you just heard a series of questions from defense counsel, and I'm sorry, from state's counsel of this witness that encompass certain terms, I am going to strike those questions and answers. I'm going to admonish you, do not consider those questions and answers when you do your deliberations in this case. I've previously given you a cautionary instruction on the terms such as deliberation, premeditation, and intent. Those are legal terms that will be defined for you in the jury instructions, and it is the court's role to define those terms and your role to assess the evidence in determining whether those elements of any claims have been established. You may continue, Ms. Elliott.
Thank you, Your Honor. In your research, have you learned that those who are outgoing also have a tendency to use social media?
There are two lines of thinking, usually referred to as sort of a rich get richer or the poor get richer. The rich get richer is exactly that. Yes, if you're extroverted, you may take that extroversion online too and be a very active texter and user of social media. The poor get richer is the one I referenced earlier, that if you have, difficulties or isolated in your face-to-face life, you might use the internet as a channel to compensate for that. But yes, that there is that thinking too. And they both have received support in the literature.
Have you, you said you looked at a sample of text messages. Were those Mr. Kozak's text messages?
Yes.
So the text messages that you saw related to Mr. Kozak and Andrea Farrington's relationship, those were only back to June 10th?
I don't recall the date. I was paying more attention to what was said than the date, but there's a timestamp on the text messages.
So it was just a matter of days that you reviewed?
Yes.
Have any of your studies focused on the tendency or not for electronic communication to create more violence in a relationship?
No, that's not something that I've personally researched, no.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Mr. Parrish.
No, you have questions? I have no questions, Judge.
Doctor, you may step down. You are excused. Mr. Parrish, you may call your next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. Janae, Wynn, would you come forward, please? Raise your right hand.
Now, would you please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear or affirm that any testimony you give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please take your seat. Please state and spell your name for the record.
Janae Wynn, Jenaywinn.
Your witness, Mr. Parrish.
Thank you, Your Honor. State, how old are you?
I'm 27.
And you are the sister of Alexander, is that correct?
His older sister, yes, sir.
And where do you live?
I currently live with my mom and my younger sister in
And
Kelly.
where is that?
In Granbury, Texas.
You need to give us an address. What's that address?
305 Robinson Court.
Okay, are you married or single?
Single.
Do you have any kids?
No.
And where are you employed?
I'm currently employed at Comprehensive Chiropractic.
At what?
Comprehensive Chiropractic?
And what do you do there?
I'm kind of the office manager. I also get our patients on and off the therapy machines. I send out the billing and kind of just assist the doc with whatever he needs.
And you have been in the courtroom with the agreement of the state during your brother's trial, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And the questions I have for you are not going to entail anything you observed in the courtroom, but we're going to talk about Alex growing up and the background information prior to other testimony coming in, okay? So that's what I want you to focus on. Tell us a little bit about your education. How far did you go in school?
I I graduated high school, and then I have a associate degree level of college education.
And where did you get the associate level?
Kind of a couple different colleges. Got Tarleton State University down here in Texas. Then when we moved up here to Iowa, I kind of finished the associate degree at NIAC in Mason City.
All right. Now, your mom has already talked about where you guys grew up, and I don't want to repeat her testimony, but I do want to talk about it from your perspective. You remember how old you were at the time you moved from Texas to Iowa?
I want to say I was about 19, about to turn 20.
All right. And when you first got to Iowa, she's told us the address, etc. Were you in school and were you working at all?
I had taken a semester off of college to kind of build my money back up.
All right. And did you start working here?
I started working first at a little tiny kind of a pizzeria place in St. Ansgar. It's about, I want to say maybe 10 or 15 minutes north of Osage. And it was called Paradise Pizza.
Okay. I'm going to have you just slow down just a little bit. You're doing
Sorry.
fine. Just take a deep breath. I'm going to have you just slow down just a little bit. And after you worked at St. Ansgar for the pizza place, where did you work next?
I applied at the McDonald's in Charles City, and I was hired not long after that.
And tell us what you did at the McDonald's.
I worked the back or front window in the drive-thru or the front counter.
Okay. And how long did you work at McDonald's?
I want to say about 2.5 years.
I didn't think they talk that fast in Texas, so.
Sorry. I'll slow down.
All right. I'm going to have you slow down. Just take a deep breath. That helps sometimes, I know. So try taking a deep breath, and I'll stop asking questions for a couple of seconds and give you a chance to relax, okay?
Yes, sir.
All right. We're going to have a chance to say everything, but I want you to make sure we say it where the court reporter can get it, okay? All right. With that in mind, have you had a chance to take a deep breath now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, you worked at McDonald's. You told us about that. Where did you work after McDonald's?
I was hired at Cedar Health. It's a assisted living home.
How long did you work there, and what did you do there?
I worked there, I want to say about 2.5 years there as well. I was a CNA.
Okay. Now, I want to talk about both of those jobs just briefly. Your mom mentioned yesterday that Alex also worked at the McDonald's. Can you tell us how he got the job at McDonald's from what you know?
I got him an application from there, and I brought it home, had him fill that part out. He filled out the rest online, and he went in for his interview, and that was pretty much it.
Okay. And he worked there for, your mom testified about the length of time. Is that accurate from what you recall?
He worked there up until I got my new job, and then about that time he quit too.
Okay. And where did he go after he left McDonald's?
He went to Port Charles.
And what did he do at Port Charles?
I believe he was either not the head chef, but he was like one of the main ones. He cooked most of the food.
All right. And did he stay at home during that time?
Yes, sir.
So would you describe your family, Janae, as a very close-knit family?
Yes, sir.
And your mom was kind of the central figure in that family, of that correct, of the three of you guys?
Yes, sir.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about Alex growing up. And we don't want a need to repeat what your mom has said. You heard her testimony, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
On those areas that she talked about, would you have any disagreement with what she's laid out and so forth?
No, sir.
All right. Then let's talk then a little bit about what you observed in Alex. Has he always been familiar with guns as far as you know?
Yes, sir.
And what about the weapons that you saw the photographs are of? Is that pretty consistent with what he had growing up?
Yes, sir.
All right. With that in mind then, let's talk a little bit about what you observed in his temper. And I want to go back starting at the age of 16, if that's okay, all right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You've had a chance to meet with me prior to today, have you not?
Yes, sir.
Okay, you met in my office and you also met with me since we've been at the courthouse, is that right?
Yes, sir.
All right. Have you also had a chance to talk to an expert, a forensic psychiatrist by the name of Dr. Logan?
Briefly.
All right. Would you tell me, please, of the earliest time that you can recall of an incident where your brother lost his temper and acted in a way that was unusual from your observations? And how old
From
you were?
16
Yes,
on to?
yes.
I can recall him losing his temper on and off.
Okay, let's focus on a particular time, okay?
There was one incident where I was taken aback by it.
Okay, how old was he?
Maybe 19 or 20.
And where did this occur?
It was at our house
In Iowa? Or
in Iowa on the
All
Maple
right.
Street house.
And tell us what happened.
We had just gotten the computer back. It had had a virus, and when you go to get that taken care of, it resets some things on the computer. And we were trying to log on to the internet and look a video up on YouTube. I'm not sure which one. And it was not connecting, loading up. It just wasn't working. Nothing was connecting or doing what it was supposed to. And Alex very quickly got very agitated at it, and then all of a sudden he just threw the mouse down, shoved the keyboard drawer back very forcefully, and just kind of started getting really red in his neck and ears area, and his face just kind of went blank, and he yelled a few things and marched off to his room and blasted his music.
The things that he yelled, were they profanity or?
Yes, sir.
After you saw that incident, did you think anything unusual about it at that point?
I was taken aback because of how angry over something really small. It's just a computer. It's not going to work all the time.
Now, after he saw that, and you saw that incident, being he was like 18 or 19 years old, how long after that point in time did you observe it took him to calm down?
At that time, I believe it took about 30 or so minutes. And then after that, if he were to get angry that quickly, it would kind of take a little longer.
Let's go forward from that. Was there another incident after that incident with the computer that you made observations about his actions and conduct?
I believe there was one. I don't remember exactly what it was. I just remember his reaction.
Okay. Where was this?
It was also at the Maple Street house.
All right. What happened?
I'm not sure exactly what it was. I just remember he was suddenly very angry, and he grabbed his iPod, his cell phone, his keys, and he marched out of the house. And his ears were red, and he was mumbling a little bit. And his car took off, and he came back maybe about a half hour, hour later, and he was all calm. He had said he went out for a run.
Did you know what triggered that particular episode?
I'm not entirely sure I can remember exactly what that was.
You know who was home at the time it happened?
I believe it was just me and my sister.
Did you bring that incident, including the incident of the computer, up with your mother?
Yes.
Did she make observations of it herself?
We kind of just agreed it was a little unusual, but I figured it was teenage male anger. I didn't really think anything of it. It was a little extreme, but I didn't really think anything of it.
Did you know of any other incident other than when he went out for the run, an incident with slamming the computer?
I could think of a few times when his Xbox would freeze up or the game just not work.
What would he do in reaction to that?
He would throw the controller down.
Did you use any words at all at that point?
Yes, he would.
Now, you had a chance to observe Alex in this household of the four of you guys. Did he have a lot of friends?
I don't want to say a lot, but he had a pretty good handful, I believed, that were pretty good friends, and he was pretty close with them.
And what about girlfriends? Did he have any girlfriend?
I'm aware of one. Her name was Kimberly Shaw.
It's the only one that you were aware of that he had prior to Callie?
That he was actually dating, yes.
And how old was he at that time, and how old was he when that relationship ended?
Probably about 18 or 19. I'm not exactly sure exactly what time of the year.
And the next relationship that he had, would that have been with Callie?
Yes.
So between the time of 18 and 19 until he married Callie, he did not have any relationships with with a girlfriend?
There was one interest in a girl, but I believe she already had a boyfriend and they didn't do much more than hang out.
Do you remember her name?
I believe her name was Alexandria, but I think everyone called her Alex too.
Do you recall when Alex came back to Texas prior to his marriage to Callie?
Yes, sir.
How long was he home at that? Well, you were living at the home at that time too, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
How long was he there?
Oh, let's see. I want to say he was there till he was there for a couple of weeks or so, and then he came back up here. Might have been the rest of the month of August.
And you heard your mom describe the incident when the minister was there to bless the home. Did you observe that incident also?
Yes, sir.
Would your description of that incident be any different than her description of that incident?
No, not really.
Was that the last time that you saw Alex before he got married?
Before he got married,
Yes, so that's the last time you saw him before he got married when he was in Texas.
I believe that might have been it. He might have gone back up there for a visit and come back, but I'm not sure if that was before or after he got married.
When he went up to get married, and that was in September of 2014, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
When he went up to get married, do you recall if you were invited to the wedding?
I was unaware he was getting married. We found that out later.
So that action of him getting married and not telling the family he'd grown up with, did that strike you as odd or unusual?
It struck me as a little odd,
Why?
simply because I would have assumed he would have at least told us he was getting married.
Did you know Callie?
Yes.
And did you anticipate or have any idea that he was going to get married to her?
I had a feeling they were becoming rather serious. At the most, I assumed maybe an engagement, but not the marriage.
And you knew Callie, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
How long had you known Callie prior to the time they got married, September of 2014?
I know she was part of his group of friends. I believed she had been dating somebody else. And then, I want to say a few months before we moved back to Texas, they started dating.
So between the time he got married to Callie and December, I want you to focus on those dates of 2014, and Alex had started working as a security guard, did anything whatsoever come to your attention that made you concerned about Alex and how he was doing?
He was having a lot of difficulties hearing back from who would become his boss, that side gentleman. And then after that, once he had the job, it never seemed like things quite went as smoothly as you would assume getting a new job would.
And tell us, how did you communicate with Alex during that time? And we'll briefly talk, just briefly, to correct things on the telephone. His telephone number is actually your telephone number at one point.
The four of us were on my family plan.
A family plan, right?
Yes.
Okay.
The last four digits of his phone number were different from all of ours.
Okay. And you shared that family plan up until, you remember the date?
I believe it must have been around end of October, somewhere in November. Alex called me and wanted to know if it was okay, if I could help him figure out how to break off from my plan and start his own.
And that's what happened?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So then, let's get back to my question. How did you communicate with Alex up until the December 31st of 2014? How did you guys communicate?
He would call Mom, text mostly. Usually if he was on the phone, we'd kind of pass it around a bit, talk with him.
Okay. And other than what you've expressed about what he was concerned about in his job, did he express to you any other frustration that he was having other than his concern about his work situation? That caused you concern?
I was mostly concerned really with where they were originally living at before they lived at that house, the last apartment in North Liberty. It was not a good apartment, and that kind of bothered me as older sister. You don't want your brother living somewhere bad.
Did he
And
text you back and forth and communicate with you when he was living at hotels when he just moved back to?
we texted a few things, little emoji cons, some funny little pictures you find on the internet.
Okay. Now let's go from January to June when this horrible incident happened. Did you notice anything unusual or strike you as unusual in terms of what was going on with Alex that came to your attention that brought you concerns prior to June 12th?
It seemed like he was getting more and more frustrated.
And how were you picking that up?
He would be very short sometimes on the text messages, about one word or two. He was always short when he was talking. He never liked to talk on the phone long. But usually a text message, you could get longer words out of him.
He was a better writer than he was a
Yes.
talker?
Yes.
As a talker, do you disagree with the fact that people describe him as reserved, as someone who does not like to talk very much?
No, I would say that's a fairly accurate description of Alex.
And has he always been like that?
Yep. He never likes calling attention to himself.
So what did you, prior to the June 12th date, what did you notice about his activity in terms of communicating with you that led you to have some concerns about what was going on with him?
He kind of wasn't really talking to me. Usually, you know, siblings, you talk a lot. Sometimes he wouldn't really respond to a text message, or he'd be kind of short about it.
That was unusual for him?
Yes.
Had he always been the kind of brother with the close-knit family that you guys had to communicate with a greater degree of frequency?
Up until a few years ago, not too terribly long, but I used to believe he would tell me absolutely, and he usually did.
Did you know anything about his relationship with Andrea Farrington?
I had absolutely no idea she existed.
Before that, did you know about every relationship that he'd ever had before that?
I believe so.
Nothing further.
Ms. Linus, Ms. Elliott?
Is this Wynn?
Yes.
You had a good family upbringing, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And close-knit family,
Yes, ma'am.
even after your parents got divorced, you felt like you had a good family life?
Of course.
And you were close to your brother?
Yes.
And up until a few years ago, you felt he would tell you everything?
I have a tendency to, I want to say maybe coddle people a bit, so I tried to pull back a little bit and not worry too much about it, but yes.
And he got married to Kelly in September of 2014? is
Yes,
that right?
ma'am. Beginning of September.
Okay. So you knew Kelly, it wasn't a surprise completely that they might get married, it's just the fact that he didn't tell you, that was what the surprise was?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And when you said he started, the last couple of years, he hasn't told you everything, is that right?
It was more of, it used to have, you know, you'd have a little longer talks, they were really short.
And when you lived together, obviously, that was probably a little more a possibility, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
The occasions you talked about when he became very angry, you talked about the situation with the computer, throwing down the mouse, pushing back the drawer with the keyboard in it. Did he ever break anything at that time?
That is the first time I had concern that something had broken. The little wheel had popped off the roller on the drawer. I pushed it back in, but that's the only time I can recall permanent semi-damage.
And when he would throw down his controller, when he would get frustrated with the Xbox, that was all he would do?
Yes.
Okay. There was no other violent things? He didn't start punching the Xbox or breaking walls
no.
or anything like
No.
that?
He'd have to fix the wall.
Okay, okay. And you never saw him being violent with another person, is that right?
Physically violent, no. I did hear him one time tell somebody to back off very forcefully, but that was about it.
Was that the occasion when something very negative was said to your younger sister?
Yes.
Okay. And so he told them at that time, back off?
In not so many words.
Okay. And that type of thing? Okay.
Mhm.
But that never resulted in any violence?
No, ma'am.
And your main form of communication with him over the last 6 months, or the first 6 months or so of 2015 was primarily by text, is that right?
Yes. It's easier to get a response out of him that way.
And you said he didn't tell you anything about Andrea Farrington. Did he ever tell you anything about Jessica German?
I knew he had a friend that they had talked about guns, but that was about it.
Okay. Did he talk about other people at work?
He had mentioned that he was having extreme difficulties with his boss and supervisor.
Did he talk about any other women he contacted online?
Nope,
Did he talk about any of his relationships online?
not really, no.
Did he talk about using different apps like Whisper apps?
I am not very well versed in apps, so usually no, we never talked about that.
And so the occasions you can think of when you've seen his temper and you've lived with him for many years and you worked with him at 2 different places, were those occasions you've told us about with the Xbox and with the computer, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions.
Mr. Parrish, anything further?
Just one last question for you. Were you aware of the incident in Texas where they were putting the license plates on a car?
Yes, sir.
What happened there?
I happened
That was
to
in
be...
2014, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, briefly describe what happened.
I'm not sure exactly what was happening. I had walked out in the garage halfway through, but Alex just suddenly threw the screwdriver down and used quite a few profanity words about how the license plate could fix itself. And he said, "And fuck off."
And did you, was that the similar type of anger you'd seen when he was at home? Or
It
was
reminded me of that keyboard incident very much, only that was much more extreme.
And you would agree then from after he left Texas in 2014, you did not see him up until this incident had happened, is that correct?
Correct.
Nothing further?
Anything further, Ms. Lyons?
Let me just see if I understand the incident with the license plate. You just kind of walked in and you didn't know what really had happened before that?
I knew my mother and my brother were getting the license plates changed, and I was walking out to see if they needed any help, and that's about the time I saw him stand up and throw the screwdriver down, because it was rusted. It wouldn't move.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Anything further, Mr. Parrish?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Ma'am, you may step down. You are excused. Mr. Parrish, is your next witness a shorter one or a longer
He'll
one?
be quite long to be Dr. Logan.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take our morning recess a few minutes early at this point, and I'm going to take a 20-minute recess because I need to address a legal matter. Please remember your admonition. During the recess, we will return at 10:26. Sorry, 10:36. Now my math is better. Please be seated. We are still on the record. Mr. Parrish, did you have a motion you wish to make at this time?
I do, Your Honor. We would move for a mistrial, Your Honor. At the time this incident happened, I approached the court, which I think is the appropriate way to do that. And I also think in your pretrial order, you had instructed us in preparing this to approach it in this manner, and also didn't want to bring any more attention to the jury with regard to this incident. But in questioning of Dr. High, it's my thought that the state violated in a very serious way the motion in limine. I hope it's not a precursor of what's to come in terms of our expert witnesses, but the prosecutor asked what I think are key term of art questions to an expert who perhaps she should have known clearly was not in that area, because they had pre-briefed him, and I sat through most of that interview, and she asked those same questions of him during that and I made a professional statement during that interview with Dr. High. She asked him the question about deliberation, premeditation, and whether or not he could offer an opinion related to that. Well, first of all, it was a setup for the witnesses to come, which kind of distressed me a little bit. why in the world was she asking that of Dr. High when he'd already told her before he even came into the courtroom that he's not a psychologist and he's not a psychiatrist? And why she would ask that in front of a jury, for the life of me, I do not understand. I think it was deliberate. I think it was intentional to bring the fact to the jury that any expert who would be testifying in this issue was not going to offer an opinion with regard to the fact that it was a deliberate and with premeditation. Clearly that issue came up with regard to Mr. Kozak's interview. Clearly it came up with regard to this court's instruction on that issue. Clearly it came up pre-trial. I don't get it. I think, Judge, it was an attempt by the state to interject into this jury the idea that no expert is going to walk into this courtroom and be able to say that. But we know they can't say it. I guess that's what distresses me. They can't say it. So why would a prosecutor who's experienced ask that question? This has been a trial that's been pretty free of any error. I agreed to let all of their evidence in. I didn't object to a single document they had to come in. And yet we get this question from a prosecutor at this stage in the trial. I have no alternative, Judge, but to ask for a mistrial. And on the basis that it was deliberate, it was planned, it was articulated in front of the jury, she knew I couldn't object to it, because had I objected to it, it would have brought direct attention to the jury on those critical questions. And you have advised us, and the state knows that we can't ask those questions.
Ms. Elliott, Ms. Linus?
Thank you, Your Honor. First of all, I want to apologize if the court believes that I violated the motion in limine by asking those questions. I did look for the specific language in the court's ruling on the motion in limine, but I don't see that there's one in writing. The state never intended to elicit an opinion about Mr. Kozak's ability on the day of June 12, 2015 as to whether or not he could plan, deliberate, or premeditate. The question simply, when posed to Mr. High, went to ask whether or not, in his expertise, he had even examined anything about those questions or had even looked at those issues. That was simply what the question was asked to do. And in fact, I knew the answer to the question was he could not, his research would not help him determine any of those questions. So I knew there would be I would not be eliciting expert opinion as to the ultimate issues in this case, Your Honor. The state believes that this is a harmless error. The court will instruct the jury on these issues later. All of the experts will be talking about Mr. Kozak's ability to plan, whether or not he had a mental defect that prevented him from planning, deliberating, or premeditating. So I know that Mr. Parrish is talking like that's not what is at issue here, and that's not what the witnesses will be testifying about, Your Honor. But I believe that lots of that testimony will come out indeed.
May I respond briefly, Your Honor?
Briefly.
Judge, she just acknowledged that she knew what the answers to the question was going to be before she asked. If that's not intentional, I don't know what else is. Then she says, well, it's going to come out that it's, whether it was deliberate, whether it was premeditated. From who? Who in the world is going to walk in this courtroom and talk about that? As I understand the rules with regard to diminished responsibility, it's a little bit different than insanity. And diminished responsibility is a medical term. The Supreme Court has said that over and over again. The Court of Appeals has said that. I have no idea what she's talking about. And Judge, for her to stand up and say, well, geez, it's going to come in, I'd like to know, that's what I'm saying. I hope this is not a precursor to what they think is going to happen during a diminished responsibility trial. I've never heard of anything like that. And I think the state did it on purpose. And I think, Judge, she's already admitted that she did it. She planned to do it. And she asked that question in front of a jury. What was the purpose of it if she knew what the answer was?
Your Honor, if I may briefly.
Very briefly.
This was not intentional, Your Honor. And I use the term plan specifically when I asked the first question. This was not to elicit any testimony to the ultimate question, Your Honor. He testified, I knew that this witness would testify that he could not answer those questions. In fact, when I asked those questions earlier, that's exactly what he said. It would never speak to the ultimate question because he doesn't have the ability in his expertise to say any of those things or speak to any of those issues. It was definitely not intentional and not planned, and I did not believe at the time that I was overstepping the bounds, Your Honor.
Well, counsel, my ruling on the motion in limine was that no expert would be allowed to render any opinion using the legal standards set by the court. I think that the motion in limine was violated here, although I think it's a very technical violation. I'm unable to find that was intentional. I think Mr. Parrish has raised an additional wrinkle here that was not addressed when we discussed the motion in limine, and that is that not only should the experts not be allowed to render opinions on the ultimate issues, but neither party should be pointing out the fact that I prohibited the experts from rendering opinions on the ultimate issues. I think the violation is a technical one. I do not think it is one that has tainted the trial in any way that would require a mistrial. I would caution counsel, I don't want to hear those ultimate terms of art asked in any questions. Your experts need to be prepared to testify without using any of those ultimate terms of art. If I should hear more testimony or more questions that use those ultimate terms, I may be brought around to Mr. Parrish's way of thinking and think that we have now tainted this case to the point that we have to retry it. I would hate to do that. We've all put a very, very significant amount of work here. There are witnesses that have made a very significant emotional investment in appearing here and testifying. There are folks on both sides of this case that have a very significant emotional attachment to the trial and to the outcome of the trial. And for the sake of all those folks, I would prefer that we not be retrying this case. So you need to be ultra cautious in asking your questions. Do not ask anything along the lines of what you just asked. And you need to make doubly sure that none of your experts are going to use the terms specific intent, malice, premeditation, deliberation. Planning, I'm a little less caught up in because that is a very common term in the English language. You should be cautious about use of the word intent, but I think it will be difficult to question any of the experts without the word intent occasionally coming up. The word specific intent should not come up ever. Is there any further record we need to make at this time, Mr. Parrish?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
No, Your Honor, I appreciate the clarification.
All right, we'll be in recess till 10:36.
Yeah, right. Just never talk about that. I know. I'm so glad. My husband taught me so well that he's smart. I was good at it anyway. I learned from my parents. He just honed my skills. You were trying to make these things like... No. You were good. You were good. It's because I watched too much TV and the rich people do. Just like put it on like a straight jacket. And then usually back surface first. Yeah, you were. Good friends. I didn't feel myself talking about it. I thought I was talking normal. Okay, I don't know if it's pretty, but it is a dark color. I was trying to read it, but I wasn't. You were okay. You were okay. You were good. Keep picking up at school. I told myself to make a point to say yes, ma'am. I can still do it. Which is hilarious. It's in your program. Yeah, you were good. I was hoping that